the methodological session. And as we've been discussing, some footnotes have been coming along. One of them, for example, was the fact that most people you see on wheelchairs in the airports are women. And the question was why? There is that question, but also there is the other question. Because if you listen to Dr. Msimenta, peace, the fact that in many cases, men are beginning to realize something fishy about their middle age. That as they age, the power wanes and the children gravitate around their mothers. If their children go abroad to the US, Canada, and so on, the mothers are always rotating. And so some fathers are deciding that they are going to keep their secret fund to deal with the isolation, that old age where they are isolated. And the other one was also about what we talked about in terms of land. So my thoughts are about the epistemic challenge of scratching beyond the surface, theorizing the power locus of motherhood in the new era, in the African setting. And it's not a consistent kind of thought. These are a collection of moments that get me thinking. When I was doing my master's, we were required to do a research project. And I was doing development studies, women and development, and many of my colleagues did things that were really tangible, very sort of easy to translate, very practical. Even government would quickly see how to come in. And mine was on the discourse around women in history. And then one of them asked me, the things we have not finished. Now for you are looking for what is not there. And at that point, I also almost gave up because I looked for women's history in the colonial setting, in the colonial struggles, especially in East Africa, and things were not coming together. And you remember when you are a student, you want things to quickly come together. And somehow I was left with that challenge, but I managed to patch up something which actually was published in a philosophical journal. But after that, I was quickly swallowed up by the gender mainstreaming wave, and I went into gender and development, became a gender expert. Many of these people here, you see them, they are gender experts. Along the way, again, I'm doing work, and I bump into these things that force me to sort of go back and see, are we really just scratching beyond the surface? If we scratch and scratch and scratch, because that's how you go below the water table. If you are superficial, you may say there is no water. But if you actually go below, you will actually scratch and get to the water table. What does it mean? What will it take? What are the dangers? During COVID, I was buying shoes from a mobile shop man. So as he was helping me to try the shoes in the comfort of my office, I asked him if he could take mobile money, this where you send through the phone. He said yes. I initiated the transaction, and a female name popped up. I said, no, this is the wrong name. He said, no, that's the name of my mother. I love my mother so much. He said it in the local language. Mama wange mwagala nnyo. He even changed, even the price now became different, and his posture changed. Accordingly, he said that's why he loved his mother. He chose to use the number because as you transact, that number pops up and also pops up on the other side of the people you're dealing with. So your mother is alive all the time. And we completed the transaction. I paid. We parted ways. I never got to know the gentleman's name. I never got to know the father's name. We parted. And this encounter got me thinking on the everyday life, the ordinary, and the very mundane encounter that sort of passes by as we seek to, deal with the big questions, economics and power and so on. And following on Njabulo, notion of rediscovery of the ordinary, what are the questions that actually should start from one's location? Questions about the world that puzzles you from your vantage point, the everyday practice, and the fact that actually from those everyday practices is where theorization should come from. We shouldn't have this theorization where you first quote Karl Marx, Aristotle, and so on, and then come to Bunwari when you're doing your empirical. Oh, as Bunwari argues, but you have actually not theorized Bunwari's work in terms of, for example, economic governance. How, for example, Oyeumi, emphasizes the fact that the treasure, Africa's treasure, is not in these things like the Benin bronzes, the DRC diamonds, and so on. And the real gems, she says, are the African concepts, ideas, values, and ways of being, and systems of knowledge and the episteme. And that also draws to the conversations that we've had around the notion of Ubuntu. Have we really, apart from referring to it, have we actually theorized it and made it part of our scholarship? And Oyeronke has over time urged African feminists to step out of the colonial imposed straitjacket of, how women are this and that, and says that motherhood has been a monumental institution which tends to signal different women's identities in society. And somehow, when we are doing work in all spaces, we bump into this. As a young graduate, I had also set out to study gender relations in Uganda. Can you imagine? BA holder, gender relations in Africa. And of course it didn't work. But one of the encounters I had with a local poet was that you people are just doing superficial things. Have you ever thought about the critical place of the maternal line in somebody's life? Apart from the fact that these days people take on names of their father, which anyway never used to be the case, and also the fact that there is that official lineage kind of definition. Have you ever wondered why children gravitate towards the mother's line, the maternal and maternal uncles and aunties? And oh yes, and he really went into detail and explained the maternal line, how it represents love, and the paternal line represents the power. And over time, the maternal line makes incursions into this power. So a woman, for example, if you followed Simone Bivu, would say wives have no power and so on because they are living amongst strangers. Now, a wife is a stranger, but up to some point, she actually becomes the point of reference. as many of these officialdom powers begin to wane along the way. And then you find grandmothers having a lot of power, mothers-in-law having a lot of power, men are very, very attached to their mothers and so on. And I took a lot of notes, and when I came back, I couldn't make sense of those notes, threw them away, and did my governance work, representation, affirmative action, and that's what I'm known for, actually. Those are the things I'm known for. And the issue then is, what have we lost over time by ignoring these everyday encounters and those spaces through which people that supposedly don't have power actually exercise agency and exercise resilience. Recently, maybe 5 years ago, while undertaking a consultancy on the care economy, which I think also Peace alluded to, we were looking at the fact that women are burdened with care work and what it would take for redistribution. As we are looking at that, we actually get to the point where men say we have actually lost out. We are here thinking we have power, but actually we don't. And we see that women connive with their children and they do all sorts of things. By the time you know it, you don't have anything. You pay school fees, but school fees is an instrumentalist kind of relationship, and it ends. But this other relationship is enduring. And motherhood then does not just become a biological role, but it's a whole social enterprise that we should actually begin to theorize and see how it creates some of those spaces that we have somehow ignored. And that is the sort of generalization that has been around women, African women, victims of this and victims of that. Granted, the victimology exists, but to what extent? And that's why Oyeumi alerts us to the fact that these generalistic notions of gender relations are in serious need of repair. Like, we need to go to the garage and repair some of these notions that we have created, and they have also permeated through policy, through what Tamale said, that we are teaching rubbish. I felt embarrassed, and I thought that maybe at that point I should have left the room because I was guilty of what she was talking about. So my thoughts about the challenge, the epistemic challenge, one of them is that we run the risk of romanticizing women's power, especially the fact that we are forced to go into the notion of pre-colonial Africa. And therefore then there we start on the slippery slope of romanticization, generalization, and even taking Africa, pre-colonial Africa, as one single entity. The other one is about essentializing women in the role of motherhood, as if there are no other roles that women have played in society, and also sort of narrowing some of the notions around motherhood into this biological role of giving birth. But the major challenge is actually the fact that you're almost forced to look behind manifest power to see power. What do I mean? Because we have this overall template of patriarchal power, and that's what is recognized. You can see it in land relations, you can see it in economics, you can see it at household level, you can see it in state processes, it's there. And you then have this very everyday practice, nuanced relations and so on, which means that you may run the risk of romanticizing the power that also may not have a transformative kind of potential. So I'm going to give just a few examples because of, oh, you're the chair. Okay. 5 minutes? Okay. So I'm just going to give quickly 4 examples that I'm pursuing with some of the young researchers to make meaning. In Uganda, we have a legend on Nambi and Chintu. Chintu was purportedly on earth. Nambi was in heaven. Nambi was the female. And Chintu was only rearing a cow and eating its dung and milk. And Nambi came so that the man was suffering. They agreed to marry. Then she brought all things, including that matoke that you people are enjoying. It's the woman who brought them the chitoke on earth, according to that legend. Within the kingship, the Buganda kingdom, which in this setting, maybe we could say in the Ugandan setting, it's one of the most stable, predictable kingdom. One of the practices is that the king takes on the clan of the mother, not the father. And in that process, kingship actually rotates amongst the clans. I don't have time to explain that. And for some people, that's one of the things that has enabled the kingdom to sort of wave across the storms all the time. And that on enthronement, the Kabaka cannot step on the throne without the sister, who also then becomes the sort of a key person on the kingdom. And also then the whole relationship with Queen Mother. So that is one establishment in Buganda. In the north of Uganda, we have Acholi. Now, we picked the marriage ceremony. And within the marriage ceremony, Nego, the mother, is a sign of respect. And the in-laws, when they enter to sort of formalize the marriage, they have to crawling. Don't think this is symbolic. They have to crawl to the mother's heart. So all these men that are like this, have to actually go down and crawl to the mother-in-law, so the mother of the bride. They have to crawl as a sign of respect, and there's a whole establishment describing why this is so and why motherhood is very important. In that instance, where actually in our general practice, we think that marriage traditions are patriarchal. Next is circumcision in Bugisu. Many of the scholars that have written on circumcision, it is a male practice. Those who cut, should I say it, who cut are male and so on. But one of the issues is that for those who are going to be circumcised, they have to be moving from their mother's house. And also because if, for example, it's a polygamous kind of entity, it is the mother's house, not just home, but mother's house. And during the actual cutting, the mother has to sit in the middle of a house as they are cutting outside, and she's the one to give the courage to the son. Symbolically, if she screams, then the boy has failed. So the mother is the symbol of that. And the coming out of the mother's heart at that time is like a second birth, a birth too. And also there's a whole description in terms of the role of the maternal line in that circumcision. But in the general outlay of things, these things are never talked about. But they are actually there in the community archives. And usually the maternal relatives are the ones that really accompany. So the mother's courage is very there, but it's not okay. Finally, in Southwest, where you saw that energetic dance, the mother represents food security. So at marriage, the mother makes a big basket, a huge basket, where all food, all kinds of food, to ensure that the girl, the bride, is taking on the motherhood role on the other side, and that the food that is produced is actually coming from the mother's line, and that the mother is instrumental in terms of transiting into adulthood. So what am I saying? Nothing. I'm saying that how do we make sense of all this? And for example, the example that I gave on land, all these sort of nuanced relations, where actually when you're talking in a very candid discussion, men will tell about their inherent vulnerabilities vis-a-vis the institution of motherhood. How come we have not really profoundly theorized it? But also the other dilemma is, how shall we make sense of what is happening in terms of informing transformation? Would that kind of discussion make sense to what we call policymakers? What else do we need to do? Do we have to always simplify our notions so as to be intelligible to policymakers? What else do we need to do? And I think some of these questions relate to what Awino talked about yesterday in terms of, what is it that we need to do in order to have a profound and transformative feminist studies on the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ahitire, for a very powerful presentation, and also reminding us to look at the empowering and more positive experiences of women on the continent, and the feminist aspects of this as well. So now I call upon our second panelist, Professor Patricia Gomez, who will speak about rewriting national history from women's perceptions, experiences from Guinea-Bissau. Patricia, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to everyone. I have a PowerPoint presentation because I choose it. In my opinion, it's more interesting because of the images I bring you here. So I will take you, I hope, less of that time, and I will talk about rewriting national history from women's perspective. or perceptions. It's more interesting, the terminology perceptions. And about some experiences of Guinea-Bissau, which is a very thin country and almost many times unknown, even from our scientific community, because of its dimension, but that has a very interesting history, in my opinion. Why speaking about women in rewriting a national history from women's perspective? Guinea-Bissau was deeply engaged in a liberation armed struggle during the 60s, the 1960s, and the middle 70s against Portuguese colonial system. After independence, in 1973 and 1974, national discourses has described women as active actors within this process, while their voices were mostly overshadowed in the public records and in fundamental research in general terms. So my presentation will focus mainly on women lived experiences in this historical context to briefly reflect about their effective contribution and relevance to rethink national narratives, as well as their place in the history. Where are women placed in national history? How far can those experiences be considered part of a changing paradigm within feminist perspective? We have spoken very along in the last days about what feminine perspective is about, what feminism is about. So I'd like, let me first, before starting, thanks very much Codesria for inviting me here, and in particular its executive secretary, Godwin Murunga, who's initially invited me. So thank you very much, because this is, in my opinion, a very important space. First of all, as an African, to know other Africans, because it is not evident, this. And secondly, to congratulate all Codesria staff for this virtuous work that is being carrying on. I would like to connect, so I'm a professor, yes, but I still think about my identity as feminist. I don't know, it is a process. And I'm concerned about women's issues. That is my point. And I would like to start just very briefly to present you, because it's important to know where Guinea-Bissau is located. So West African coast, it's a coastal Lithuanian country, very thin, about 36,000 kilometers. We are neighbors, me and Professor Pendambo, so Senegal in the north, and Conakry, Guinea-Conakry in the southern and eastern part of the country. You can very quickly see that we have problems of illiteracy, problem of women's political participation, and problems of early marriage. So the engaging women in an intellectual work is important, as well as in education questions. So I will start by presenting you. This is not a political, it's a political pamphlet, but the vote, we just voted in Guinea-Bissau to elect a new government and a new parliament. So this is a woman that represents Nelvina Barreto. It's a politician, and it is the present situation of women. So Nelvina Barreto, it's one of the few women head of list for deputy from his party, which is this Partido para Unidade Nacional of National Unity, for national unity. So, and she is very engaged with the women agenda in education, rural development, political participation, between other themes. And she is very much concerned with women's unity. Thus, history matters to understand women's current position in Guinea-Bissau society and politics. How important and relevant is women's history to understand national history? Why there is a need to rethink and rewrite Guinea-Bissau's history to have a more correct perception of the process and its protagonists. As I mentioned earlier, history mentioned women without having them inscribed in it. Documentation in different archives in Guinea-Bissau and abroad can confirm my statement. This is a picture, archive picture that was given to me. This is Teodora Inácia Gomes. She is one former combatant of my country, and she has participated as educator, as a trainer, as a militant and a combatant. So these kind of images are important to understand how important women has participated and how relevant they were in the process of the liberation struggle in the country. I've been engaged in a research project, in a research project focused on women's trajectories in the liberation struggle. The discourses, while important, they did not include women's voices themselves. Considering the discourse, it became clear to me that there was a gap in terms of historical discourses and in terms of intellectual engagement around this theme. It became evident to me the need to explore oral sources as a methodology in order to fill this gap. So I think it's important to connect this local discourse to some African reflections that are in the floor. And I'm very glad to be here and to meet personally one of my inspiring researchers and scholars, which is the colleague Josephine Awikwire from Uganda. And the other, this is a chapter that has been published in one of Codesria's most important journals, which is Journals of Higher Education in Africa, and it is all online, so you can consult it. And she addresses a very important questions in terms of methodology. And the other picture is of Conceição Evaristo, which is a novelist and a poet from Brazil, Afro-Brazilian poet and novelist. And she has been very engaged with women's emancipation, but women's way of being through what they write. So she coined this, she proposed this concept of escrevivência, which I translated in this way. I don't know if it's correct, but I think it's, what for me makes sense. written lived experiences. What she wants to say with this is that women have to find ways to liberate themselves, and the way of write their own stories is important and don't have to be limited to some kind of vocabularies or words or academic way of presenting texts. And I remember here Saya's presentation reminds me this. So the reflections and questions raised by Josephine Auquire in an inspiring paper that I already mentioned, in my perspective, brings relevant questions to think my own research context and how feminist methodology can give directions in the field. As Auquire stated, feminist methodology goes further beyond techniques used to gather evidence. It is about theory and epistemology. It helped me in my reflections on what is being studied and why, and above all, where women are located in national history. How then to rewrite history and how to include the untold narratives, the untold stories. So it is not, we cannot speak about women without mentioning our national leader, one of the most outstanding intellectuals and Pan-Africanists in Africa, which was Amilcar Cabral. That was a man that thought theoretically the liberation struggle, but proposed a practice way of engaging people in the liberation struggle. So the ways that we could build, we could think a new society beyond the colonial society, beyond the colonial relations, and going back in history to our own culture and pre-colonial relations. So he said something very important, that Guinea-Bissau could not engage in a revolution, in a transformative idea without considering women as an important part of this revolution. So, and this is a picture of Escola Piloto. It was the school, the liberation movement school, or the party school, the important school that was located in Conakry for obvious reasons, because the liberation struggle was clandestine. So there was a need to have the headquarters abroad. So it was in Conakry. And this is Cabral in the middle with students, because education was one important part of this struggle as cultural change. This is one of Tenen Camara, elected member of First People's Court of Tribunal de Tabanca. It's Tabanca means a community, rural community in Creole. So one of the fronts, and this means that we are also talking about political participation of women. So through oral history, so what I then think it's important as a methodological approach to think, to rethink and to rewrite national history in Guinea-Bissau through oral history, listening to written lived experiences, and as I already put it here, and by female former combatants of Guinea-Bissau, and their importance to have a more comprehensive understanding of the process. These two pictures are very important because they represent, here in my left, in your left side, there are represented three former combatants that are known in our history. That their names are registered in our public records, in our books, and in the texts. In the other side, you have a picture that I took from an archive, and that the name does not appear at all, and she was at the same way combatant, and she struggled for the liberation struggle. So there is a problem here. Beyond the fact that women should be inscribed into the history, the national history, there is another problem, that is, what about the untold voices that are the majority of women in this country, in our history? Those are some examples. I don't have time to talk of all of them, but what I am trying to do in my research so far is digging into history and trying to bring into the debate some experiences that, in my view, can be useful to have another understanding of what liberation struggle was about and what was the project itself beyond the liberating country from the colonial system. This, for example, Nyarwata Ngada, her name doesn't appear anywhere. We don't have in any place. So oral history and the listening, this exercise of listening, is quite important, in my opinion, to register this kind of narrative, because they are relevant. They are individual experiences, but they also contribute to what this morning I found very interesting, what Godwin put down has oh, I forgot, sorry. A collective humanity, or humanism, I think. That is something that we can share, a humanism that we can share all together. This means that we should not exclude parts of our population or part of our experiences. This is another one, Nima Muskuta Toure. Both are women that have fight for the national liberation, and what they say are words very important. But one thing that emerged is the fact that the major part of the society, moreover young people, don't know what they did for this liberation struggle, how they participated, what were their roles, and what they actually did. Because when Nima said, for instance, my mother was part of Tabanka committee, sensitized people, gave rice to people, feed people. But everything was done in total clandestinity. No stranger could know where the committees were positioned. This situation also made it difficult to advance to go further in fight, which lasted many years, 11 years of liberation, of armed struggle. And when we talk about what violence means, I think we should address this question of violence in a very historical perspective, because, for instance, my society was made from very violent relations with the colonial power. So this, the last experience, Ana Maria Gomes Soares, one of my interlocutors, former combatant as well, says a very interesting thing. So this work, as you can see from the dates, I've been working from 2009. So there's been long time, years. And what she says, she addresses very critically women's political participation in the country, but calling the attention of everyone and of researchers, of scholars, to pay attention to the relevance of history when we are addressing the things and the narratives that talk at all of women. So these are another scholar from Nigeria that has helped me as well to understand these questions, has that in a feminist perspective that puts women as they should address, they should think on their own ways and define themselves as they better wish. I think feminist perspectives also is of course about that, and methodology of listening. This work of listening, these narratives can help us to arrive to this kind of work. And this is, just to finish, a publication of that I have edited with a Brazilian colleague, and where I have a chapter that speaks about women struggles in Guinea-Bissau. Former combatant, but moreover I'm focused, and my interest is on these untold voices and these overshadowed perspectives and narratives that I think can help us to have another understanding and a more comprehensive understanding of the history. And to close, this is an image of maybe an encounter that can be interesting to think. We have addressed many things in the last 2 days about how we can make intelligible what we study about women. I think one of the things is rethink spaces where we act in, rethink spaces where we converse, where we dialogue. For instance, here I was in a local community of the extreme south of Guinea-Bissau, and this is a former combatant that knows nothing about what we are talking about here. But so we should, yes, I'm about to finish. We should stop a bit and reflect of how are we engaging our studies in relation to the communities we are supposed to study. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for this very interesting and pertinent presentation. reminds me a bit of my own research when I was my PhD research and the gaps in the literature and a lot of women's experiences that haven't been documented and some of which would actually be feminist activism. So there is a lot of work that can be done in this field, intellectual work, academic work, which we'll take up later. But for now, let me call upon our third panelist, Dr. Sharon Omotozo from University of Ibadan. And she'll be speaking on bridging research praxis, divide in feminist methodologies, a Word doc model. I hope I said that well. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, it's been 3 days, and I think there is an advantage in being part of the last set of speakers. You will have been able to harvest more than enough. So, on that note, I want to say that when we say we are looking for feminist methodologies, I imagine that they're already existing in this room. We talk about Kampala, Uganda, and we wear Kampala as a cloth. We talk about Guinea-Bissau, and we do wear Guinea. We talk about Ankara, and we wear Ankara. So what methodologies are we still looking for? Well, I'm grateful to Codesria for this opportunity to attend my first Gender Institute. I must say that the Higher Education Leadership Institute that I attended has since given me a shift of focus and a lift in my scholarly and administrative engagements. In the year 2000, Elaine Salo highlights how social sciences has remained perpetually deaf, thereby reinforcing the death of gender scholarship in the social sciences in Africa. I imagine how, in the early times, fear of rejection pushed the frontiers of women's studies across institutions in Africa to an embrace of gender to replace feminist scholarship. Perhaps androcentric methodological flaws, which painted feminism in bad light, has also contributed to that shift, which necessitated a place for gender research in the academy. As the idea of gender as a social relation concept is getting inadequate in the conceptualizing and understanding of the myriad challenges that women experience, I picked that from the concept note, I describe Codesria's turn to feminist methodologies as a return to the initial starting point, since gender thinking has not succeeded in leading us to the finishing line. The first time I tried to write a feminist article using human hair to theorize, reviewers threw my articles back at me, and the article never saw the light of day. However, it became my first pointer to the methodological melee I may be getting myself into. Central discourses around methodologies remain focused on the practicability, systematic nature, and universal acceptability of pathways that justify what is claimed to be knowledge. Since feminism is an amalgam of ideologies, research, activism, connecting idea, experiences, and realities, the expectation is that it will draw from the actual day-to-day experiences of groups of people who have traditionally been excluded from the production of academic knowledge. In the process of learning gender, scholars encounter feminism. So what do they do to take forward this encounter into communities? Shouldn't there be a different entry point of feminist methodologies into our systems beyond the pages of journals and books? How do we tell the grassroots woman that she is feminist? How do we engage in translating our research so that they can see how they feature and how we use the data we mine from them? How do we curb the scourge of extraction and expulsion, which the grassroots communities are often exposed to? And when I say extraction and expulsion, I'm talking about research data here. How do we write feminist labor so that it is performed with community understanding, one that connects the woman on the street with feminism,
one that translates online activism to offline actions? To answer these questions, some parts were already explored. You recall the WID, Women in Development, the WAD, Women and Development, the GAD, Gender and Development, GM, Gender Mainstreaming, GESI, Gender Equality and Social Inclusion, GESI, Gender Equality, Empowerment and Women and Social Inclusion, Empowerment of Women and Social Inclusion. And now, with an urgency of a shift to feminist methodologies currently deployed in the academia, we have intersectionality, we have embodiment, we have standpoint, relationality, reflexivity, positionality, and so on and so forth. We should also not forget womanism, motherism, nego-feminism, Stewanism, and how they speak to feminist methodologies. But what is expected to change when we shift from gender to feminist methodologies? Despite these conceptual breakthroughs and the much progress made by feminist research using these methodologies in Africa, why is the political will to implement feminist programs still low? Could it be that researcher civil society grassroots link is wobbly? I am of the view that as debates on feminist methodologies advance, the end is being sidelined and the means romanticized. My argument here is that methodologies have stayed for too long within the confines of the academy. Research fields have remained a space to harvest data, yet we often write the data into studies without returning to the field to see how findings may trigger the desired change. Feminist methodologies, which would thus have been a continuum encompassing research, development practitioners, and the data mines, have estranged other stakeholders. In the words of Jane Bennett, the demands of our work and the institutional and organizational conventions through which we channel it frequently leave us neither time nor direction in terms of how to actually think through the meaning of doing research in our contexts. To address this, MAMA finds three approaches. One is to research on activism. Two is to research on activists, which we saw Patricia just did. And three is to research for activism. While these three are laudable, the know-how for achieving their goals vary. Unfortunately, the academia seem to have majored in number one, research on activism, and have left behind 2 and 3. In 2017, when I assumed office as the coordinator of Women's Research and Documentation Center at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ibadan, I took time to run through the files of the then 30-year-old center. I began seeking answers to the following questions, which I believe are key to today's conversation. Number one, how have feminist research been conducted? Number two, what are the methods used or being used? Number three, have the methods led to the desired epistemic rupture, or what we may also want to describe as intellectual orgasm? The first thing I noticed was that my predecessors were writing practice into research, and they were bringing research into praxis. The works of Bolanle Awe, Larry Denza, Nina Mba, Abiola Odejide, and many others opened a pathway for my feminist methodological sojourn. It is that journey that came to mind when I was assigned to discuss feminist methodologies at this meeting. On this note, I present a Wardock model for bridging research-praxis divide in feminist methodologies. I call it the Wardock Methodological Bridge Building Model. To substantiate my claim, I enter the conversation with 3 of my works published in 2020. The first one, titled Heariness, I will just shorten it, Heariness and Hearlessness. I eventually came back into the hair research when I regained courage. Heariness and Hearlessness which explains a divide between elite women and grassroots communities, despite their shared epistemic invisibility. The second work is When the Hairy Goes Bald, which explains the inaudibility of women despite their visibility in spheres of influence. And the third one, Akada Activism, which expresses the havoc wreaked when history writes women from the academia out of the narratives of feminist struggles. These three works engaged or encouraged synergies between government and the masses, between the older and the younger female academics, between international development partners and local NGOs, and so on and so forth. And this synergy, which I named symbiotic interactionism, nosedived during the political instabilities of the 1990s in Nigeria, alongside institutional challenges, but it picked up again in the 2000s. Having observed how the NGOization of feminist struggles crept on the scene and bifurcated the academia civil society engagements, how feminist studies were shelved while development partners and grassroots went in different directions, the 2000s saw a return to the Waddock methodological bridge building model. Waddock restored a multi-stakeholder approach to research, teaching, training, and policy advocacy. So from here, I'll begin to share with us, if time permits, I'll show some pictures, otherwise I'll just speak. From here, I'll begin to share some of the things that we did that I can say that they have spoken to bridging the research praxis divide with our research, with our feminist methodology. Great. So we have the monthly seminar series, and there we discuss emerging trends, feminist theories, progress reports. We bring scholars to share with us, and it's a monthly program. And there, what we try to do is to ask questions like, how do we engage research uptake? How do we bring studies to end users in intersectional contexts? Are they allowed to critique the theories? So when we do the theories at our seminar series, we take them out and we see how the grassroots will engage with that theory. Are they allowed to criticize or to question those theories? Or is it just a matter of speaking to ourselves? We ask those questions at the seminar. And then we also ask, how do we deal with reflexivity and positional distortions? For example, when we talk about feminist methodologies, will the study conducted by any researcher funded from the global north still be valid when they are asked to describe their research participants in demeaning terms? That discussion is ongoing. So your supervisor, who is not African, is asking you to go do field work, and when you get there, they're asking you to describe the room where the interview held, or the environment where the interview held, and they want you to describe it to portray poverty, penury, and so on and so forth. You know, so these are things that we need to begin to think about when we are talking about feminist methodologies. And we also have what we call the annual International Women's Day celebration. At that space, we bring in elite women to evaluate progress, especially as they pertain to national issues. By this, we provide platforms for conversations with policymakers. We challenge technocratic fragmentations resulting from narrowly developmental work on gender in Africa. And the 2022 edition was a reflection meeting on strategies of engagement in light of the 5 gender bills rejected by our parliament. And that happened on the 2nd of March, 2022. So we bring people together to talk about these things and how we have been able to respond to them, or what we are doing to address those issues. Third is our annual International Day for Grassroots Women. There, we bring women out of their natural habitats. We bring them into the academia. We bring them into the academic environment to discuss pressing issues, findings, and collaborative possibilities. In the 2019 edition, I recall we're talking about education. We're talking about girl-child education and how we wanted women from the grassroots to encourage their girls to go to school and things like that. And one woman stood up from the audience and said to us, "Thank you for bringing us into this room. But we have a question. And the question is, why did our teachers stop using colored pens to write the results of our children?" So we asked, "What is it about colored pen?" Then she answered, "You know, we are not schooled. We don't know the figures. But in the past, whenever we looked at our children's report cards, if there are many red pens there, then we know they have failed. But you stopped writing with colored pens, and all we see are just same colors. So we don't know when the children are doing well or not doing well." That is what I call feminist methodology. Because now they are speaking back to us and telling us what we are not doing right. And then we engage with alternatives, pragmatic methodologies. So when study participants refuse, we are on a project with Professor Sally, and there we are talking about motherhood and changing notions of identities. And there was this conversation that came up that when you go to the field and you speak with respondents and you ask them to sign, you remember we need to sign the consent form, and they tell you, "Oh, but I'm here. What more consent do you want? I agreed to speak with you. Why would you want me to put my hand inside paper?" And so that also questions our methodology. They claim that their presence is consent. So is IRB format, as we have accepted it, is it working for our systems, or we need to do more and be more ingenious? We also talk about, at that grassroots meeting, they tell us about the crab syndrome. Why is it that women are not voting women? And they tell us that women cut off the ladders when they go up, but men extend their ladders. These are the words from grassroots communities. We also talk about, there was another session where we talked about how to address the increase in child molestations and things like that in our communities. And they told us that, "Oh, you book people, you are just talking to your books. We have traditional medicines and measures that we use to protect our girls from rape and from all kinds of molestation." So we had to begin to probe further, in that instance. This, for me, is feminist methodology. We also have an annual WADOC Girls Summit, where we bring girls from ages 10 to 18 together on a 2-day meeting. And there we deliberate on whether our methodology has emotional intelligence. It's important for us to begin to ask, when I ask you to relate to me what a rape experience was like, what am I looking for? How do I empathize with you? What questions should I ask? How further or how deeper should I probe? And so on and so forth. Feminist methodologies beyond writing also entails being intentional about entering closed or sacred spaces and seeking allies who can open those spaces. So I recall in 2020 that my husband was going to attend a meeting of clergies, and he encouraged me to come along with him. And I told him, "You had better not take me along, just go." But he said to me, "Your feminist experience may be relevant at the meeting. Why not come along?" So I did. I got to the meeting and I found out that only about 5 women were present at that meeting. The rest, over 100, were men. Unfortunately for them, I don't know what they saw, they decided to ask me to do a greet the community kind of thing. "Oh, so is here. He's here with his beautiful, amiable wife, and can we just ask her to greet the audience?" I told them, "That's bad news for you." So I went up there, and because it's a sacred space, I looked around and I told them, "I am saddened that women are not in this meeting. Why do we keep our women at the back? And we expect them to perform these and these and these functions." And then I told them that in my right as a feminist Christian, I am sorry to tell you that we are already too tired to be telling our sisters to beware of pastors. The whole place went silent. And when I finished speaking, everyone avoided me like plague. When we got home, my husband said, people started asking him, how do you cope living with a feminist? This, for me, is also feminist methodology. It opened the space. I took advantage of it. Feminist methodologies must be subjected to the test of praxis if parity and knowledge gaps must be closed in good time. Our turn towards feminist methodologies is an intentional attempt for us to reclaim feminism. And when I say reclaiming feminism, what is it that the younger people who have access to the Twitters and the whatever of this world, what is it that they are saying about feminism? How does it connect with the feminism of our mothers, of our foremothers? And how does it connect with the challenges of today? How does it connect with policy making, policy advocacy? How does it connect with the grassroots communities? These are questions that we need to ask when we put feminist methodologies on the table. Our turn towards feminist methodologies is an intentional attempt to reclaim feminism. I just said that. If we agree that it should be about co-creation, mentoring, strategic stakeholder choice, writing people into research, and writing research into people, can Codesria create a framework of accountability on research praxis breakthroughs? That's the point I'm putting on the table here. And my conclusion. As is agreed that any feminist methodology should perform the function of analyzing power relations, engaging with positionality, identify oppression, and ultimately reposition women by augmenting their status and well-being across spheres, the core of my argument here is that feminist methodologies must connect with the field for optimal results, and that the academy must be the perfect example of plausible models to achieve this goal. Consequently, for feminist research to challenge power and bring about the desired change at a quicker pace, feminist methodologies must recommit to bridging the research praxis gap. Permit me to close by alluding that with feminist methodologies, knowledge is produced without a context in which that knowledge is produced within a context in which meanings and experience cannot be simply distinguished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for this, again, very interesting piece, plus the very relevant examples of...
Be painful. This epistemic rupture, after this, I am convinced, has to be painful. Because I think that, and I think it must have been the executive secretary sitting there who said that space for introspection is necessary. And that space for introspection requires us to be brave, to look into the middle class laziness. Because we use these theories sometimes just to fit in what we perceive into some kind of paradigm. And I think it's blatant laziness accompanied by the rush to produce specific things. And it is a way in which we sift and ignore some of the rich experiences that we have shared here that are, that could actually create new ways and frameworks of interpreting things. It's also the pressure to be fashionable, because sometimes we leave certain things out because they just don't align with the human rights model. It's too drastic to carry this forward as if it is something that we deem credible. We also, I think, will arrive at a stage, if we do that introspection and point at half the problem towards us, we will be then able to start lobbying for the decolonial bottom line, so that we are able to then allow for these other alternatives to the university. I think actually we are getting to a space where we will need an alternative to the university in order to unravel the richness of and meet halfway real life. The alliances and the networks and the Codesrias and the museum journals and all of these other things that are not streamlining us the way that we are being streamlined. In South Africa, we have youth that are into this thing that they call fallism so much. And eventually we will have to contend with them, because part of their lobby is that our education must fall. They are not just saying fees must fall and all of it. It must fall because we have not given them meaning in the manner in which we have been doing things. And therefore, in order to alleviate a disaster of the death of the university with us inside, we have to establish alliances outside of the university that actually can speak truth to, I don't want to say data, truth to reality in a way that will carve new spaces for decoloniality. Thank you.
Thanks. I would request colleagues to keep it short, to give respondents some time. Next gentleman.
Thank you so much, our panelists. Quite an engaging session on methodology. As I listened to Achille and also Patricia, you can hear a methodological approach that is tending to history, to archives, to legends. And I wanted to learn from both of them why legends? For instance, Achille, why legends and how significant? And what does such an approach bring to the feminist discourse? Because as the previous speaker said, there's a tendency to pick the trendy and easiest and then leave out these legends which we meet in everyday life, but we think that is outdated knowledge. And again, the second one on Achille, your story springs from a gentleman whose identity is closely tied with his mother. And I wanted to know, in your project, how do you intend to focus on masculinities alongside motherhood so that we do not end up losing the complexities of how identities are intricately constructed and related with each other?
Merci beaucoup. J'ai écouté avec grand plaisir, même si j'ai raté la présentation de Joséphine, les présentations qui portent justement sur la méthodologie historique. Vous savez, dans l'histoire, de façon générale, mais particulièrement dans l'histoire de l'Afrique, la mémoire collective gomme systématiquement les femmes. Elles participent au moment de la lutte, mais elles disparaissent après dans les recherches, dans les nominations, dans la vie publique, même dans les lieux de mémoire. On voit très peu de femmes, les places publiques, porter le nom des femmes combattantes. C'est vrai pour la guerre en Algérie, c'est vrai pour les résistantes dans les pays où il y a eu les luttes pour la décolonisation, etc. Et ça, je crois que ça a été un des éléments de justification justement de l'ouvrage Engendering Social Sciences. La mémoire collective, elle n'intègre pas beaucoup les femmes. Mais est-ce qu'on s'est déjà posé la question, pourquoi dans la lutte pour les indépendances des pays colonisés par le Portugal, c'est là où il y a le plus de femmes engagées dans la lutte armée. Je ne dis pas seulement dans la résistance, mais dans la lutte armée. J'ai visité le siège du PAIGC à Bissau. Je vois le siège, le PAIGC d'ailleurs qui est un parti-État, vraiment très difficile de le dissocier de l'État, avec beaucoup de femmes au siège, des photos, etc. Mais on ne voit pas les femmes jouer un rôle sur le plan politique en Guinée-Bissau. Et ça, je me suis posé la question pourquoi. Quand on prend le cas du Mozambique, un membre fondateur essentiel Au Mozambique, c'est Josina quand même Machel, la première épouse de Samora Machel, qui fait partie justement des membres fondateurs du Frélimo en Tanzanie, je ne sais plus où. Et elle est décédée peut-être même avant l'indépendance, juste après l'indépendance. Elle fut une combattante de la liberté, essentielle, mais on entend très peu parler aussi de Josina. Nous avions conduit à la FARD dans les temps Linda Magaya, qui avait l'habitude de venir dans les réunions de la FARD avec sa tenue de combattante, justement dans le maquis pour l'indépendance. Toutes ces femmes ont pris les armes, mais après elles disparaissent complètement de la scène. Je crois qu'il y a lieu quand même de rendre à César ce qui appartient. Ne serait-ce que la figure de Josina Machel et toutes ces femmes, il faudra quand même que dans les pays de la Palépo, les pays qui parlent la langue portugaise, qu'on puisse quand même rendre hommage à ces femmes et les valoriser davantage parce qu'ils ont fait autant, sinon plus que les hommes pendant les périodes extrêmement difficiles. Merci.
Thank you. We have 1, 2, and okay, we'll take the 3 and then we'll give the response. So yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. And I would like to thank our three great presenters for very interesting papers on methodology. The first and simple one is for, I think, Codesria, because Codesria has done a great job in giving English and French versions of papers, and we use them. But I was asking Patricia at lunchtime whether her papers are in English, because we do teach the PIGC and Amilcar Cabral very much in our gender and politics paper, nationalism. But she says her papers are still in Portuguese, and we shall need support to translate them from Portuguese into English. We might need Codesria support there. The other thing I want to ask is to Professor Hichire. She has researched a lot on motherhood and how the mother figure was important in these 4 communities. Is there an opportunity, or did you ever have a chance to observe where other forms of female identities are celebrated instead of the mother? Because when you come to many Ugandan men, they'll tell you how they are ready to kill for their mother or the daughter. And you ask her about your wife, that's a different matter. So, Professor Hichire, did you ever find this going into partners, or it just stopped with mothers? And on the issues that Sharon presented, actually there are 2 great issues. Particularly, I liked the idea of end is sidelined and the method is romanticized. In Uganda, we have a very big Ministry of Gender, and the government has adopted a definition of gender, which is men, women, children, people with disabilities, people from marginalized communities, and everything. So which that means is when the ministry is planning for gender things, there is a choice. For example, to focus on people from marginalized communities and put down the female-male binary and the gender relations therein, because in any case they've done gender. When they give old people their SAGE, their allowance, that is gender, but not. So we have to be actually attentive and about these things, otherwise the gender will actually fall through the cracks. And lastly, to Sharon again, I liked the view that you're coming up with a WODOC idea of the research methodology. But from what you presented as examples, I thought it was more of difference in experience. And my question is, does difference in experience automatically translate into difference of method? And I'm not putting down experience. I love experience. That's what makes things unique. But if I come and research or I encounter something in the field, can I then claim that I've come up with a different method? And I think that's important at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the amazing presentations, and also the comments that are coming up, because I think we are now in a conversation enriching together. I was struck by many things. I'll stick to just 1 or 2. That comment, and I just wanted to put this in the room that Prof. Brenda has just put into the room of Josina Machel. I actually got a message yesterday from an upcoming Kenyan storyteller who was telling me she's wanting to develop a body of work on African women combatants, you know, those independent ones. And she said, I want it to be from all parts of the continent, but I can't find anything on anything from Lusophone Africa that is translated. And she specifically asked me, do you know anybody who knows about her beyond her name? So it was really interesting that you just put that into the room in relation to the work that Patricia is doing. But more generally, I wanted to, I really was struck, Sharon, by the 3 categories you gave us: research on activism, research on activists, and then research for. And I want to ask if any of you, it seems to me a lot of our work ends up stopping at documenting, analyzing, and maybe sometimes theorizing. But I wondered if any of you have seen any work associated with your case studies that then goes to developing some kind of curriculum. I'm thinking of, there's a toolbox called Beautiful Trouble that's offered to civil society, where they actually take case studies of what is happening, do the analysis, put theory to it, and turn it into a toolbox, and then offer trainings to people so that you're not only getting strategies to use, it's a way of introducing you to theory and giving you a body of work. And as I was listening to all of you, I thought, wouldn't this be fascinating, especially if we can do it, so we're not only producing research, we're producing curriculum. And I'm thinking of the Gender Institute. You're able to take in not only young academics, this is the epistemic rupture part, but you're able to bring people who are activists or policy actors into the same meeting. So we're nurturing a cohort of intellectuals working in different spheres, but connecting across the board together, who are learning from work that has been done. Because I know sometimes when you're working with civil society, one of the frustrations is always the methodology and strategies that we're using, because we have them written up, documented, turned into strategies, is all coming from the West. It's not coming from our own spaces. And often you hear anecdotes, but it's not theorized sufficiently. It's just like, oh, I've seen people in Uganda doing this. This is amazing. This is great. But we haven't put that, what they're doing, we haven't thought about it significantly to say, oh, and by the way, now let me introduce you to feminist thinkers. What you're actually doing, let me link it to the concept of intersectionality. Let me link it to that other concept. So I wondered if any of you have done any work or seen any work that moves that kind of research into this kind of space, and how Codesria perhaps might help with this.
And I just wanted to say, mine is a comment. As a practitioner, I've been involved in 6 international public interest litigation cases. 6. And one of the successful factors that lead to success for us to be able to get justice, different forms of justice, be it monetary or non-pecuniary, is the methods that we were using, especially with women. I'm hesitant to use feminist approaches, so let me just say what I want to say. Especially with women, I remember, apart from Mau Mau, which we had 5,528 beneficiaries, 30% were women. We have Kakuzi, where the Queen is still holding land in Kenya, and we won that case at the Royal Court of England. 22% were women, but we could have gotten more. We have Kakuzi too, of the poisonous macadamia and avocados. Women were the primary laborers, and we, out of around 10,000 community members that could verify, they could show the effect of the poisonous food, I'd say maybe 16 or 17% were women. And I can go on and on. And right now, there are 2 cases we are dealing with. Ekitera, which is Unilever. Unilever employs women primarily because of cheap labor. But they can't come forward. Maybe it's the methods we are using. So the methodology plays such a huge vital role in breaking that glass ceiling to get women to be involved. Picking up from what Mushaya has spoken about, there are cases that we failed to get to go very far as a For instance, where we get female combatants who are engaged in colonial era liberation narrative coming forward and talking about the abuse they faced from fellow combatants, that one we could not get through because of the methodology. They just said, no, we were at war and we were victims like any other, and we never got far with that. So the methodology is very important to get message through. Thank you.
I think that, yes, epistemic rupture has a cost, whether in material, tangible ways, or symbolic, and also the losses that may happen, because over time we've got people accustomed to simplistic kinds of propositions, and now it is even hard to say the word feminism. Imagine people are asking why you're moving from gender to feminism. I thought all along we've been using feminism, a feminist encounter and methodologies. So this movement, I actually don't understand it, but it actually seems that we've lost ground. And with all this global backlash, there is need for real reconnecting with some of these questions. Why legends? I think Amon is asking what he knows, and he's trying to see how he will now get the students to know that legends are part of knowledge. Because when he puts those in the class, they think it's just things they call them things of long ago. That's how they are described in primary education. But we are saying that a legend is part of community philosophy, and we actually need to engage with those for us to actually reconnect with the present, reconnect with the past, and also inform the present. And some of the stories that we read when we were in lower primary, which we used to take for granted, you find that they actually resonate with the kind of cultural context and the ways in which it is able to inform how you understand these things. And also, very important in terms of why motherhood and why not fatherhood? What's the place of masculinity then, and femininity? And I think it connects with the question of what about other identities? Karen Sachs wrote about of sisters and wives, and showed, for example, how sisters are belonging. It's an identity that describes belonging, while wife describes an identity of an outsider. In this case, in this instance, I'm doing what they call inductive kind of, I think, like walking in the dark and bumping into things that you've been avoiding all the time. And one of the things that I've been avoiding is to theorize motherhood. Maybe it will also take me into these other identities, but the locus of this is motherhood, not just as a biological role, because some people perform motherhood roles when they've never had biological children, but as an institutional site that plays, itself within the social milieu that we are really talking about, and how it's sort of is a nest, and we really need to open that nest and understand it in terms of how our society has functioned. So yes, other identities are very important, but my entry is motherhood, and I think correctly it will draw in other identities. And why I said, for example, the women who are wheeled around in the airports, where are the fathers of those children that are wheeling their mothers around? I'm very sure about what has happened to them, because there is a whole complaint about the fact that, you know, you pay school fees, like now it is school, back to school, men are running around paying school fees, but when the children graduate, they are there. I wouldn't have graduated if my mother wasn't there. And they ask, but your mother didn't pay school fees. And then that relation continues, and you see that there is a sense of being abandoned. And that draws also from the fact that the emotional kind of touch that draws also from the work of that Peace has talked about on masculinities, and how it draws that gap and the coalition of people around the three cooking stones. All these are things to theorize, not to take for granted.
That's it. Thank you, Professor Josephine. So, Patricia, can we keep it compact? ICT is already there. Thank you.
So very quickly, just quickly to Amon. Interesting point. Why legends? And I would say, why mediators? Why need mediators to approach this theme, this topic? And I give you a very simple example. There is a very interesting phenomenon happening in Brazil with so-called Lusophone African diaspora studying there. Many of these young students, graduated students that are making their graduation, they are engaged in researchers, projects about their countries of origins, okay? But when you come to see the bibliography, you don't see even, or maybe 2 in 20 citations are African. So we have problem. We have a problem. This is one question, one point. The other one is within the, sorry, but I have to say that within the African feminist community, and I put myself in that. Are we thinking how and how much are we paying attention to what we are reading from each other? Do we know what each other's production? How are we citing each other if we do so? Or we are going, what Afro-Brazilians, a very interesting reflection they made, that it's the geopolitics of the knowledge that goes, when you want to talk about ourselves, you go to the United States, Canada, and then you go back to where you should start from. Why? So this is a question, knowledge is power. So we have to think about it. Another thing is, Panda, many thanks. This is something, that's why I started my presentation. I didn't have maybe time and a question even of the expressing myself in English. I start with that politician, that woman of today, a politician. So it's true that we were engaged, our history tells us this, and we have evidences of women's engagement in the liberation struggle. But when you look at our political parties in specific way, what you were talking about, PGC, and this is a reality in all other in the most of the parties. You don't have women leading, but this is one part of the question, because maybe we have to look at other dimensions and other spaces where women are leading. For instance, economically speaking, as entrepreneurs, even in political activism, we have many women leading social movements, political social movement activists. In terms of arts, in terms of cinema, in terms of as novelists. So why we only pay attention to the problem when in political parties, political organizations? Why we don't shift a little bit and look at other experiences and positive ones to understand, maybe from there to change things in our politics. And I think I will stop here. There are another question, but maybe we can
in the break.
Okay, after. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chair.
And now we give Sharon the floor. She can.
Thank you very much for all the contributions, observations. I will start with Pearl, and the idea of rupture has to be paid for. I agree. And I say that the price to be paid is across board. It's not just the intellectuals. I think spaces like these that are, that bring us together also have prices to pay. For example, we need our journals to open up. Some of these methods, the reviewer reads them and they are like, so where is this coming from? And then they just shut it out. So when we are talking about feminist methodologies, they don't necessarily have to have existed somewhere, but it's worthy of opening up to see, oh, what can this become? And then it could just be the beginning of another conversation. So when we talk about that price to be paid, we all have to pay that price. I also say that Amon was asking about can we accommodate masculinist thinking in the feminist method? And I say that that is what Gender Lens was meant to do, only that it did not quite do justice to it. So it didn't do justice to it other than to make patriarchy comfortable that they have not lost the space to feminists. So if we now say that we want to return to feminist thinking, then feminist thinking has to do with what Josephine was talking about mothering and how do we theorize mothering. And so we are bringing pure feminist thinking into the space. And then you guys who work in the masculinist space can engage with it and tell us how it operates in your space. We are happy to accommodate that. Okay, I don't know how better to say that, but maybe we can talk about it later. Sarah was asking about the difference in experience and difference in method. Does it mean that difference in experience will equate difference in method? And I said the same answer to Pearl. If we open up, methods will keep emerging. So, on that also I should say that citation is very important. Sometimes our colleagues are not courageous enough to name what exactly they are describing. And it could just be somebody across the room who will say, oh, this sounds like what you are discussing. And then it becomes a method. So I think it's also very important. I can't remember who asked the question about, have you seen any of your work associated with advocacy? I think it's Faith. About advocacy, I'm not sure. I say yes to that because for us, let me talk personally about my personal experience. When I work with organizations like UNESCO, and I have to write a handbook for them or something like that, I make sure that the theories that we discuss in class are put into that handbook. And then I also make sure that when we have training sessions, I don't tell the participants what exactly they are doing, but I ask them to do stuff. And after doing that, I can tell them, oh, this is what we call feminist leadership. Okay? This is what we call this. But they have acted it, and so they understand it better. So I think that's also an approach, and we take it also into the classroom. We don't just tell them about these things, but we let them see how it operates across spaces. And I've had to do that with a number of my findings, intra-feminist crisis. What happens between women? We've been talking a lot about that in this room, how women don't support women, how men say, oh, women are their own worst enemies and things like that. But what are the things that surround, what are the factors that surround these things? Is it not patriarchy again? You know, and so on and so forth. So we act those things out. Currently, I'm working on feminized corruption. And every time I talk about this concept, I am bringing people to the table with practical examples to see how corruption is feminized from our mothers, our grandmothers, and the kinds of feminist economy that's, you know, surrounded their lifestyle as at that time, and how that is different from our experiences now, and so on and so forth. I can go on. My last comment will be that we should also avoid the danger of merely historicizing and not naming the methodological import of what we do. Call it something. Leave it on the table and let people respond to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, yeah, in this...
And the reasoning behind this session was initially it had 3 presenters, and then one could not come to the meeting, and then the other one was suitable for a different panel. So we thought we could have a final panel that reflects not just on what we have been doing in the last 3 days, but with a prospective look. What are the things that we need to be thinking about as we walk out of this place? And I thought that Ramola was a suitable candidate for this
conference. So that's how I was intimidated. And also the way that, and in this way, I think also, I think of myself as a PhD student at that time, and how Codesria as a community mentors and supports the growing academics, and myself being, that was my first participation. And also I was new to Codesria. I missed the deadline, and I remember writing and asking, can I still send something? And I think Professor Olukoshi was the ES at that time, and this is what was told to me when I was there. He said, well, give her a week. If she sends something that's of standard, then we'll invite her. And that's exactly what happened. I sent a full paper, and it met the required standards, and then they sent me the ticket and everything. So there starts the journey from Cairo and wherever it's taken us. So this, I'll try to keep it brief. It's basically, I'll try to wrap up some of the key issues and then looking forward. I'd also like to add that I haven't participated nor attended a gender institute, but many of the gender symposiums. And Codesria has been doing key important work and trying to mainstream gender in a more significant way across the programs and activities of the Council. Myself, going back to Codesria and gender, I can say that being a student of Professor Amina Mama and at the African Gender Institute at the University of Cape Town, I had the privilege of listening to the stories shared by these pioneer African feminists and how they, at that time, so this is the late 90s, how they struggled with the men in management at Codesria at that time struggled to get gender and feminism into the intellectual work of Codesria, and I think it's those struggles that led to the publication of that book, very well referred to by our students, colleagues, etc., in Gendering African Social Sciences. So, and there's so much more that the Council can do. Some of the key issues raised, feminism, and here we are looking more specifically at African feminism and the significance of integrating feminism more holistically, is something that came out more comprehensively, whether it's in the work, in the Gender Institute, in the work of Codesria, and also beyond, because we have to remember that Codesria, what the force of Codesria is its community, and all of us, we being members of Codesria, but also coming from the institutions, whether it's universities or civil society groups, wherever we are, we can reach out much more widely and take this feminist activism, whether it's in our intellectual work in the field or beyond. Okay. So, and Codesria is here in terms of support, and this, I'll speak to this in a little while. And during the discussions, some colleagues highlighted the struggles of some of our colleagues, feminist activists and academics went through to drive the feminist and also gender agenda, some of which was personal, but also within the academy, driving change. Also some of which was on women's rights, which goes even beyond the academy. The LGBTQI, okay, this is an issue which is still, I mean, there's a lot more to be done. And what is also interesting is the sharing, like some of our senior colleagues are, and even not so senior as well, are feminist activists themselves with a lot of experience in the field and who've done significant advocacy works and publication towards on women's rights. The issue of language, which was just mentioned, and fewer submissions coming from West Africa, North Africa, and also you know, there might be more written, but which is just not, it's the language issue. The need for a tracer study. So this is like, yeah, and this was mentioned yesterday by Awino, Sheila, a few colleagues, on what has happened to the laureates of the Gender Institute. And I'll pick on what Godwin mentioned, that at one time the majority of participants were men. And it would be interesting to know if these men have turned into, have done like gender transformative work or gender sensitive men. What are they doing? That would be an interesting study. And there's also, I mean, we could also look into the possibility of having, and this is what was also mentioned, a Codesria gender focal point in the different institutions, universities, and I think in some way we're already doing that, but this could be emphasized in a more forceful way. The need for more or stronger institutional goodwill to advance women and gender studies. So this is something which is fairly uneven on the continent. Some of our universities have very progressive and advanced, whether it's departments, centers, schools for women and gender studies, and some of us simply don't have one. So what can we do to, you know, bring or introduce women and gender studies, or if it's not just introduce, but encourage the study of women and gender, and also knowledge creation in this discipline across universities and countries, because we were talking about the gap in feminist knowledge on a number of issues, and having more of our youth, whether it's doing their dissertations on these topics, and introducing women and gender studies is probably one way to explore, and how can the council not just assist but also guide us. The need to broaden the African feminist community came up, and this we've had, like, I know I have had the support of many of our senior African feminists who've been there as guides, and we learn from them, but also for us to set the example. And many of us work with students, so what can we do to, you know, broaden the feminist community, which would also include boys and girls, not just women. So and how can we involve our institutions in this? what kind of support will we need, and where can we take it? Using feminism as a framing tool in the Gender Institutes was also discussed. Can the Gender Institute be a strategy for organizing? I think the discussions in this Gender Institute is already pointing in that direction. There was a question on whether Codesria can convene a meeting or some connection of African vice chancellors. So discussions around academic freedom, which would also include gender dimensions. So this is something looking forward on the connection between the council and the academic community and institutions on the continent. And then there was the various themes and issues, thematics discussed in this institute. I won't list them because we've already, but each of these could be the issue or a special issue of a journal or a book. They were so rich. And they also point towards, areas in which a lot more work can be done, and in which you could actually have a gender symposium on each of these specific themes, whether it's on gender in the economy or masculinities or the gender in the law. I mean, it was really, really rich. Implications of being in a female body, that was even another theme and could be another conference. Gender and sexuality. And a key question that was asked: what ground has been lost? What do we do? What battles do we fight? That's an even bigger question. Importance of theorization, that was just discussed in the last panel. The silences around women's and gendered experiences, the gaps in the published literature, which I know I've struggled, and I'm sure others have struggled with, and what we can do as scholars to try and close some of those gaps. And then there were also the documentation of the more positive feminist stories of African women's strength, whether it's motherhood, as Josephine was talking about. There's their participation in national women's struggles, and now more recently, if we look at women's role in the COVID-19 pandemic, I'm sure this will come up in the General Assembly in some of those papers, but these are looking at gender dimensions, the more contemporary. So, and then the methodologies and importance of training and teaching. So, and going forward, what are some of the points that I was thinking of? We are here as talking about feminism and feminist oriented research, but there's the whole discipline of, when we talk of feminism, is action oriented, moving towards change. And as when we look at, I speak of universities because this is directly my experience. Many universities, definitely mine, there's still this glass ceiling and patriarchy and women academics, fewer women in senior positions, or fewer women professors, or women academics sitting against a glass ceiling before they can achieve in senior positions or be promoted to professor positions. And the men, and I've seen it, the obstacles that they face are much less than us women. So what can we do? How can we make this more visible, especially in the African context, and the greater sharing among the community as a network of women scholars? So that's one area, women in academia, which is also a feminist issue and problem. And the second is about feminism and gender studies in Africa, knowledge creation, moving forward with the discipline, and how can the council then plug into these two areas. And as I mentioned earlier, Codesria, what we need to bear in mind, it's not just the ES and the EC, but it's the whole community. So we need to look at how all of us, as a group of scholars and members of the Codesria community, how we can plug in on contributing to the whole idea of the Gender Institute and feminism on the continent. collective engagement from all of us and involvement from the community to take the gender issue and the feminist question at higher levels, and also for us mentoring the next generation of African gender scholars. I was one of them, and now we try to take it to our students, training the next generation, and maybe in this way, what support can we get from the council? And there, some suggestions. I have 3. There's the intellectual support through the vast network that Codesria has. In the network there are some very senior scholars, so we can draw on that. And then the institutional and network support, mentoring, so which can help us through taking it forward as support network for women scholars themselves, and also within the discipline of women's and gender studies, feminism on the continent. So what can we do to support and encourage gender and feminist studies in academic institutions? Can Codesria, can we get, looking at the council, some kind of support to, if it's, I know it depends on universities, but if it's coming from, it could be in terms of intellectual support or maybe guidance towards applying for funding to set up centers for research or teaching and training on gender. So this might help, especially in the current era where in public universities, but also others, where funding for the humanities and social sciences has been shrinking, and increasingly in this COVID time. So funding for starting new gender and feminist studies departments or centers is more challenging for us. So in this is an area where community support and maybe advice and guidance from the council on what can we build, sharing could help. So I'll leave it at that and hand over to Godwin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramola, for that excellent summary of some of the key interventions that were made on the floor, and a suggestion on the way forward. Mine is going to be really pretty simple, because I just think that if for no other reason, and especially for colleagues from Makerere University, precisely because Josephine made this an issue. There is an example of somebody who has grown through the networks of Codesria, right? And it's only one. We have so many. And I am now trying to respond to that question about Codesria disappearing. To the best of my knowledge, Codesria has been in Mauritius only once. So we don't need to come for you to engage us. I think that this is an important point, because part of what many of us have done has been that we've literally we're children of Codesria. Children of Codesria. In 1997, when I was undertaking my master's studies at Kenyatta University, before I even started writing my thesis, I applied to the Codesria Governance Institute. And Codesria then became the basis of my growth. I don't think there are more than 2 institutions that can claim me, Codesria and Kenyatta University. And Mshai is whispering to me Nairobi University, but Nairobi University is a beneficiary of the work of Codesria and Kenyatta University. And I feel that one of the frameworks that we have used to identify, mobilize, and grow young academics has been the Gender Institute. 28 years down the line, based on the mapping that Awino suggested yesterday in her presentation, we haven't done extremely well, but we have done well. And the challenge now for me is one of mobilizing this cohort of Codesria children to accumulate the knowledge that they have and to upscale it way above Africa. This is going to be the challenge, not just of Godwin Murunga as Executive Secretary, but this is going to be our challenge. So as part of the outcomes of this meeting, I want to propose 3 things that I think are going to be useful for strategy. The first one is that if we demobilize this team, we don't demobilize the whole of it. In other words, that the task of my training grants and fellowships program is going to be to keep in touch with you. And I'm saying this while looking at Dominique, because she's the one who is carrying this message to the program. We're not demobilizing this team, because one of the main arguments that has run through the 3 days that we've had has been a desire to accumulate knowledge, to reclaim the policy space, right? And to use that for the possibility of a rupture. And we're not going to be apologetic about mobilizing slightly violent language in order to capture the ears of those ones who are claiming our spaces. One day I was we were at the Mwalimu Julius Nyerere Festival. I wish Sylvia Tamale was here. And there was a Kenyan politician who kept on making the argument that he doesn't need anyone to tell him about feminism or women, because to him he knew women because he had 3 wives. And Sylvia Tamale said, this is a teachable moment. When they say a stupid thing, you make sure they know that that's stupid and it's intolerable. And I feel, and occasionally I feel that maybe I shouldn't be the one making this argument, but I think someone has to make the argument that we have accepted a lot of stupidity for far too long, and we need to stop. There must, as Professor Zeleza said one day, there must be a cost to foolishness. And this team can help us ensure that that cost is so high that whenever people attempt it, it doesn't survive. Awino made reference yesterday to the meeting we had in Dhaka where a young gentleman who had gone through the Gender Institute actually said that the things she said about women inviting their own rep. And I had so assumed that that was not the space for that foolishness, that when he said it, I actually was sincerely lost for words. So I think part of the message we walk out of this place is not just that we want a rupture. I think we want that rupture to be based, among other things, on increasing the cost of foolishness in relation to discussions around the topic we're talking about. Now, as usual, of course, you have to be brave. As usual, of course, you have to be strategic. As usual, of course, you need to have the science backing you. And the second proposal I want to make out of this meeting is to request all of you to please take time and write down the ideas that you have shared with us. Because I think we need to carry that as a statement from this And I would prefer that we publish it in Codesria Bulletin rather than in Africa Development, because I'm listening to Sharon very carefully. I'm not sure she knows that I'm listening. Africa Development will require you to meet specific scientific obligations. And it has gatekeepers. I'm one of them. Because occasionally I go into audiences where they're asking me purely about science. Codesria Bulletin is a space for a conversation, often a very difficult conversation. It is the space that gives Codesria the identity that we enjoy, mainly because some of the leading debates on significant thematic areas in Africa began in the bulletin. And for some reason, we in the Secretariat have allowed ourselves to lose the value of that platform. And I feel like this group can help us begin to recover that, if not on other thematic areas, at least around feminism. And to make the point, using the example of Ramola and myself, if you will, that as children of Codesria, we've come of age. We've come of age. And through the pages of Codesria Bulletin, we are unapologetic. We are unapologetic about what we want to say, about what emotions we want to express, about what song we want to document, about which poetry we want to share. Okay? It's a space in which we can try whatever we feel like trying, because who said that feelings are not legitimate acts of expression and conversation? So that's the second thing I would like to request from you. Please, the earlier the better, because I would also like then to carry a document like that to the General Assembly and give it the space in the plenary panels that it deserves, and to get some of you to speak to it in plenary at the Codesria General Assembly, so that it's no longer a question of we have 10 gender panels in the General Assembly. It is a question of where were they? If they were all in the parallel sessions, we're missing something. Patricia will tell you, this was something I surprised her and a few of her friends. In the last General Assembly, I decided that the plenary sessions often get allocated to senior academics. So he decided to change the formula to bring the young academics into the plenary so that everybody can listen to them, and they didn't disappoint me. So that's the second suggestion I would like us to carry from here. The third suggestion I would like to carry from here, based on the argument that we shouldn't demobilize what we have already created here, is that I would like roughly about 5 of the participants in this meeting to be present in the discussions we are going to have in a month's time at a reflections meeting on governance, so that you can help me carry the message from here to there and to every other convening that I'm going to have with the community. Many of you might not know, but it's a struggle to keep the gender agenda on the agenda. So when I have a set of militants working with us, the Secretariat, I think we will carry the message in a way that that makes sense. And I'm not just thinking about the reflections on governance, which we are going to have on the 5th to 7th in Lomé. I'm thinking about many of the significant activities that we're going to have. In the new strategic plan, we have identified 4 thematic areas and 4 cross-cutting areas. And gender is a cross-cutting area. And the gender budgeting we did last time helped us begin to bring the conversation back to the forefront. But I don't think that that is enough. I think that there is more we can do to make sure that the conversation is legitimately at the gender conversation is legitimately at the rightful place, the right table and the right seat in the room in all our documentation. We also have some of the other thematic areas that have come here. One of the cross-cutting areas is history, memory, and archive as a theme. Generations, we opted not to talk about youth, we talked about generations. And then the other one is rurality and urbanity, part of the conversations that were introduced by the panel on land. And the idea is to find a suitable way of making sure that of the core 4 thematic areas, the cross-cutting areas manifest across. Okay? And I'm hoping that these discussions here should find space in all subsequent discussions around the thematic areas that we have selected for ourselves, so that it's no longer a point about add-ons. I'm excited that this meeting did not worry about the politics of entrism, right? Because I think we have created enough knowledge for us not to be asking to be at the table. It is more about us being at the table without debate. I feel that therefore we can make significant follow-up through some of the summary issues that Ramola has raised, based on an assumption, based on a normalized assumption that the process of learning, unlearning, and relearning sits at the core of the methodologies that we adopt. I'm also making the assumption that we are on the same page in relation to the need for methodologically bringing intersectionality at the center of it. That's the only way all these questions about violence against minorities can begin to be dealt with in a more comprehensive way. I'm also making the assumption that we're carrying not just a Pan-African orientation, but actually a transnational orientation. Later this year, Codesria will begin a 3-year engagement on the question of reparation. And we want to collect a number of African academics to help us map how that conversation should be. And if that conversation is not gendered, then we have missed the very point of what we're doing. So that the idea of a global Africa, the sensitivity to that Pan-African orientation that transcends boundaries and crosses continents, must be at the center of everything that we do. And that therefore, at the end of the day, the methodology facilitates our need to decolonize almost everything that has been worrying us for long. I must say that one of the bigger worries I've had at Codesria, mobilizing academics into Gender Institute, Gender Symposium, is that a lot of it has been about ticking a box, and people go. And we're going to tighten that. I think Awino suggested for me in a formula of doing that. State very clearly what you are going to do and hold people to that. And I don't think we've done that very well, and we're going to do it a lot better than we've done before. There is a conversation we're having about how to proceed with the Gender Institute and the Gender Symposium. I don't know if it was Mshai or somebody asked about strategy. The very idea and the conceptualization of the Gender Symposium and the Gender Institute was that one was a training ground and the other one was a forum for strategizing. We didn't sustain the gender symposium very well like we had hoped, but we're going to recover that actually not very soon, effective next year. And there are the possibilities that we will be considering, if they agree, to have Makerere as our site for the symposium, for the institute, and find a suitable location for the symposium. But that is on condition of how many colleagues from Makerere University are going to register as members of Codesria by the end of today. I've done quite a bit of politics, so I know how to frame my argument. But I also want to suggest, as I feel this meeting is suggesting to me, that we must have a core of participation that will continue to help us accumulate this knowledge, strategize for it, and invade the spaces that we need to invade. Now, the executive secretary doesn't need to be there, but the blessings of Codesria must always be at the table, and the support must be at the table. That said, it means therefore that we are placing on the table an intention to do something. Because when I started this meeting, I said we lacked intention. I think we're recovering the intention, and we're placing it at the table. It will make very many people uncomfortable, even in Codesria. It's not going to make me uncomfortable. It's not going, and if we are not doing well in the secretariat, we want to hear it. Because some of us need to be kept honest, right? There is all this thing we used to say that Codesria has its owners. We now are the owners, because we have an agenda that permeates everything that needs to be done in Codesria. And I hope we can invade the policy space. Our challenge in relation to the policy space, we must be very categorical, is not simply among our policy actors in Africa. It's not just with the AU. Our biggest problem is with people who think Africa is too important to be left to Africans alone. When I'm sitting in Dakar, and I'm getting a bit infuriated because I've just remembered the things that I see. When I'm sitting in Dakar, it is almost a common thing for me to receive a document from a European organization asking me or Codesria to comment on the document. And all they did is to stamp a logo of the African Union. Everything else wasn't done in Addis. I don't want to name names, but we have the documentation. So if we are journalists here who would decide to share that, we can defend. It has become all too common that everybody else is packaging documents, stamping an African Union logo, and sending to us to comment so that we can provide legitimacy to the things they want to say. And I'm not doing it. I have not done it, and I'm not doing it. We have walked out of meetings because we walked in thinking we were going to collaborate and we were going to be listened to. I can see Paul is laughing. Only to walk in there, and we are meant to be rubber stamps. So the policy space is being invaded by everyone else except Africans. In some of these African organizations, you walk in there and you have a battalion of interns from every country other than Africa. They are collecting data, they are collecting documents, they are collecting everything. And then when we wake up, something is happening, we are surprised how they knew. I spent, me and Awino worked at the African Leadership Center. We used to try to send our fellows to the AU for internship. It was the most difficult thing to do. We got some there, but it was the most difficult thing to do. Reclaiming that policy space is going to require strategy, and Codesria has to figure out how. So we'll be convening a team of colleagues to really help us think. And if it doesn't work, we will use our external platform to make enough noise in order that nobody says we were not. And the neoliberal agenda has survived in Africa in the last few decades without pushback. Everybody has a right to say whatever thing they want to say about Africa, except us. We need to raise the cost of foolishness. Essentially, that's what I mean. So that is something that I have gained from this engagement, and I'm really grateful to all of you for not just being here, but for also being willing to share your ideas. And I want, therefore, to conclude this meeting by acknowledging the support from all the colleagues who came from far to come and join us to enrich this discussion. I was happy that we just defined the possible areas of intervention, and you all mobilized your ideas to bring them together. I want to thank all of you for this. Special thanks to our colleague Awino, our colleague senior academic Fatuso, Joy Kwesiga, who had to leave because of engagements elsewhere, for really leading us in the thinking. We don't take this for granted, and I think that the lesson I have learned from some among the senior academics that I have is that the continent calls on you to sacrifice for it, and we've never failed to get that sacrifice. And I don't think there is any monetary value you can place to the sacrifice. I'm constantly reminded of my other who was here yesterday, and she had to fly all the way to Qatar in order to go to Cairo because of the visa restrictions. It's difficult to live in this continent, okay? And there is no monetary value you can put to those difficulties. Actually, often there is even no need of quantifying them, okay? So I really want to thank the keynote speakers for this. I want to thank Josephine. Josephine had a team that included Peace, who is right here, Professor Sarah Sally, who is there, and Duncan, who has been donated to me for the General Assembly. Josephine donated Duncan to me because she thinks the General Assembly is too complicated, I must collapse. So Duncan will be there to save me from from collapsing. And I want to thank all of you for not just accepting to host us, but for making it possible for us to actually be here and enjoy being here. And a part of the outcomes of the meeting we have, we requested Dr. Amon right there to listen to all of you and do a summary, an engaged summary of what was discussed here. And we have agreed that he will take time not just to summarize, but to reflect on what you said. And my hope that we will shortly publish that engaged conference report in Codesria Bulletin online for purposes of all of us. And we will translate it into both English and French. And I'm being reminded, and also in Portuguese, and Arabic, and Swahili. Any other? So I want to thank him for accepting at short notice to do this. The challenge of translation is real. A significant part of the Codesria budget goes on translation. And we try. But the greater challenge we are now having is the challenge of getting the right translator. It's difficult. We have the money. Let me make that point very clear. We have money for translation. We have a problem of finding translators. And ours is a peculiar problem because there are certain things that people share with you, very brilliant ideas. And if you're keeping it in-house for 3 to 4 months waiting for translation, it begins to defeat the purpose. Okay? We're doing several experiments. We now are beginning to, we're already publishing in English and French. We're beginning to publish, we have dedicated publications in Portuguese. And we're now working with the Arab Council. And we're discussing the possibilities of consistent translation of some of our work. But it's not as easy. I must say that one of the legacies that Tandika left that we lost was that every Codesria publication was always translated. And we don't say this too many times, but one of the best translators that Codesria had, whom we can't use anymore because he's a busy man, is Aikwe Yama. Many of the very early books of Codesria were translated by Aikwe Yama, and the translation was as authentic as Aikwe Yama because he understands the languages very well. But we will translate, and if you can help us do the translation, please reach out to us, because we are desperately looking for good people who can translate our work. Our problem is not the money. And if the money becomes the problem, we will look for it. Then let me also thank Codesria staff. I had a team of about 5 people who joined me in planning this. The agreement in the Secretariat is that they do a good job and I get the congratulations. So Dominique, who came here from the Training Grants and Fellowships Program, and I'm sure all of you heard from Dominique before you saw her. Hadi Jup, who remained in Dhaka because not all of us can come to a meeting, and Gladys, who is my boss because she controls the money, and Sheila, who is a program manager in my office. They all combined to make this possible. So I want to, before I receive the congratulations, I want to make sure that you know that they are the ones who did this. And then there is a team of colleagues here in the hotel and others from Makerere, including the interpreters, who have been supporting us quietly. Actually, we know more of their voice than who they are. If you don't look in the cubicle at the back, the translation, the interpretation has been excellent. And when we come back, we're not doing a fresh bidding for the interpreters. We will be happy to work with you again, and we want to return our thank you to all of you. That said, I want to again return my word of thanks to all of you, to wish you safe travels back to where you came from. Duncan has assured me that until the last person leaves, he is not retiring from Makerere. So we will make sure that we are there to get you to the airport and back to your destinations. We want to ask you to please keep in touch with the council, and we will be calling upon you. The key point I want to say is that what Codesria has achieved is, in every sense of the word, the sum total of what you have achieved. if you don't achieve, Codesria doesn't achieve anything. So let's continue with that spirit. As Patricia will tell you, a luta continua. Thank you very much and all the very best.